I've driven that stretch of highway more times than I can count. It's a straight shot through farmland and patches of woods. Nothing remarkable about it. But one night in late September, that road became something I'll never forget. Something that's been haunting my dreams ever since. I had just wrapped up a long work trip out of state and was making the drive back home. It was around midnight when I crossed into my home state, and the weather had taken a turn. Earlier in the day, it had been warm and bright, but by the time I was heading back, the rain had set in hard, leaving everything damp and cold. The air inside the car felt stale from hours of driving. The low hum of the heater filled the cabin, and my headlights carved a narrow, wavering path through the darkness. There was no one in the passenger seat, no one behind me, just me, the endless road, and the sound of my windshield wipers squeaking in a steady rhythm. I was tired, but not dangerously so. I'd had a big thermos of coffee earlier, and was just eager to get home to my own bed. The drive was lonely, but I'd done it dozens of times before. There's a kind of comfort in knowing exactly how the road bends, where the gas stations are, and which stretches are so quiet you could almost forget you're in the real world. I was somewhere between mile marker 110 and 120 when I saw the first overpass. At first, I didn't notice anything strange. The rain made everything look blurry at a distance, so the shape I saw up ahead barely registered in my brain until I was much closer. It was a man. He stood on the very edge of the overpass railing, his posture slightly hunched. He wasn't facing the road. Instead, he looked out toward the dark fields beyond, as if something out there had his attention. Even from that distance, I could tell his clothes were soaked. His shirt clung to his back, and his jeans hung heavy around his legs, darkened by the water. His hair looked plastered to his skull, the rain dripping from it onto the concrete below. My first thought was that maybe he was going to jump. I slowed slightly, scanning for any sign of another car nearby, wondering if he was stranded. But as I passed underneath, I made the mistake of glancing up. He was looking at me. His eyes were wide, unnaturally wide, and his mouth hung open like he'd been caught mid-breath. There was something about the way his gaze locked onto mine that froze my stomach into a knot. I drove on, trying to shake it off. People hang out on overpasses sometimes. Maybe he was drunk or high. But as I replayed the image in my mind, I couldn't shake the wrongness of it. About 10 minutes later, I came upon the second overpass. And there he was again. Same wet clothes. Same posture. Only this time, he wasn't above me. He was standing just off the shoulder of the road, barely outside the white line. His head was tilted slightly to one side, like a curious animal. And even though I was going 60 miles per hour, I could see his eyes following me as I passed. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. My pulse thudded in my ears. There was no way this was the same man, and yet, I knew it was. I hadn't seen a single car behind me since the first sighting. There was no sound of an engine in the distance, no sign of headlights. How could he possibly have gotten ahead of me on foot? The inside of the car suddenly felt too small. The heater's steady hum had turned into an oppressive drone, the kind of background noise that makes your head feel stuffed. I rolled the window down slightly, letting in the sharp smell of wet earth and asphalt, hoping the fresh air would calm me. But it didn't. About 20 minutes later, I saw the third overpass. I think my hands were already sweating on the wheel before I even spotted him. This time, he was crouched on the railing. His bare feet gripped the concrete like claws, his knees bent at an awkward angle. The rain poured down his face, but he didn't blink. His mouth was stretched into a grin so wide it looked painful, and even from a distance I could see his teeth. When I passed under him, his head rotated slowly, following the car until I could no longer see him. I didn't look back. I just pressed the gas harder, my speed climbing well past the limit. But a few miles later, movement in the dark caught my eye. In the field to my right, something was keeping pace with my car. At first, I thought it might be a deer or a coyote, but when the road curved slightly and my headlights swept across the grass, my stomach dropped. It was him. He was running barefoot, his soaked clothes clinging to him, his face twisted into that same unnatural grin. His head didn't bob the way a runner's should. It stayed perfectly still, his eyes fixed on me. I slammed the gas pedal down. 70, 80, 90. The shape in the field blurred into the darkness, and finally, I couldn't see him anymore. When I spotted a lit gas station up ahead, I swerved into the lot so sharply my tires squealed on the wet pavement. I parked directly under the bright, fluorescent lights, my heart still pounding, hands shaking. Inside, the place smelled faintly of stale coffee and motor oil. A tired-looking clerk in his 50s glanced up from behind the counter. "You all right?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly when he saw my face. I hesitated before asking, "You see anyone come through here on foot?" Around my age, tall, soaking wet. The man's frown deepened. "On foot? Out here? No. Haven't seen anyone all night." "Why?" I forced a laugh that sounded thin even to me. "Just thought I saw someone." He shrugged, but his eyes lingered on me for a beat too long. Like he wanted to say more but decided against it. I stayed inside longer than I needed to, pretending to browse snacks I didn't want. Every time the glass door creaked open for a customer, my pulse jumped, expecting to see him walk in, dripping, smiling, silent. After about 15 minutes, I finally convinced myself to go. The rest of the drive home was a blur. I didn't see him again. But the entire way, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from somewhere, just beyond the reach of my headlights. It's been months since that night, but I can't drive that highway without glancing at every overpass I pass under. Because deep down, I know he's still out there, waiting. I'm not proud to admit this, but I'm the kind of driver who usually sticks to the highways, especially at night. The bright lights, other cars around, and the steady hum of traffic give me a strange kind of comfort, like I'm never truly alone. So when I ended up on that rural Montana back road, miles from anything familiar, it wasn't by choice. Earlier that evening, I'd been on the main highway driving home after a long day of meetings. I was exhausted, but relieved to be heading back to my small apartment in the city. Then, the GPS blinked a warning. Roadblock ahead. The traffic had ground to a halt after a massive accident, and the only way forward was a detour that would take me far off the beaten path. I didn't have much choice. The clock was creeping past 10 p.m., and I wanted to be home before midnight. The detour led me onto a winding, narrow back road cutting through dense forest and rolling hills. The trees arched overhead, their twisted branches blotting out what little moonlight might have peeked through the thick clouds. It was quiet, too quiet. No birdsong, no rustling animals, no distant hum of life. Just the steady drip of rain on my windshield and the dull roar of my tires on wet asphalt. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, the tension making my nerves jumpy. But the silence felt unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. The radio crackled weakly, picking up faint snippets of static and ghostly voices that faded in and out. As I rounded a sharp bend, something caught my eye. A figure standing by the side of the road, half hidden in the shadows. At first, I thought it might be an animal, maybe a deer startled into freezing in place. But the shape was too tall, too still. It was a man. He wore dark clothes that blended perfectly with the night. Rain plastered his hair and soaked through his jacket, the water dripping down onto the cracked pavement. His face was pale, but I couldn't make out details, except for his eyes. They were wide, dark, and locked onto me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. My foot instinctively hit the brake, slowing the car. I reached for the door locks and glanced around, searching for any sign of a house, a car, anything. Nothing. The man raised a hand slowly, pointing behind me, down the road I'd just driven. I hesitated, looking over my shoulder, but the road was empty, swallowed in shadows and rain. When I looked back, the man was gone. No footprints, no sound of movement, just vanished. My pulse pounded in my ears as I slammed the gas pedal, desperate to put distance between us. The trees seemed to close in tighter, and the rain fell harder, the wipers barely keeping up. My phone buzzed suddenly, a text from an unknown number. I froze, fingers trembling as I opened it. "You can't run." A cold shiver ran down my spine. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror. There, glowing faintly in the distance, were headlights. A car was behind me, keeping pace despite the winding road. I pressed harder on the accelerator, but the car followed every turn perfectly. Its headlights flickered oddly in the rain, not the steady white glow I expected, but a wavering, sickly orange light like embers glowing in a dying fire. The road narrowed even more, and the shoulder disappeared entirely. My heart raced as the car edged closer, the orange lights flickering brighter. At the next curve, I slammed the brakes and pulled onto a gravel shoulder, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The other car mirrored me, stopping just a few feet behind, its eerie glow dimming but never going out. I sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel, sweat beading on my forehead despite the chill. Then, a soft tapping at my window jolted me. I turned slowly, breath catching. The stranger stood there, drenched and pale, rainwater dripping from his hair. His eyes held mine with a hollow emptiness, a dark abyss that swallowed all thought. He raised a finger to his lips in a shushing gesture. His voice was barely more than a whisper as he said, "Some roads you don't want to take." A sudden gust of icy wind swept through the car, rattling the doors and windows. The stranger's form blurred, becoming translucent before fading completely into the misty night. I didn't wait to see if he'd return. I started the engine and sped away, my heart pounding in my chest, every nerve screaming to get back to the safety of the highway. When I finally reached the glow of city lights, the tension didn't lift. The image of those dark, endless eyes haunted me. In the weeks since, I've tried to rationalize what happened, exhaustion, stress, maybe a hallucination. But every time I hear rain tapping on my windows or see a shadow out of the corner of my eye, I remember that back road, the strange man, and the words he whispered. Some roads are shortcuts, yes, but some roads lead you somewhere you were never meant to go. I never believed in bad luck or ominous signs until that night on Route 66 changed everything I thought I knew. I'd set out on that trip seeking freedom, a fresh start after a brutal breakup that left me hollow. The open road had always felt like an escape, a place where the past could be left behind with every mile. But that night, it felt like the road itself was a trap. I'd spent the day driving through the scorching Arizona heat, listening to old rock albums, and letting the desert landscape blur past my windows. As dusk fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and the endless stretch of Route 66 started to feel more eerie than romantic. The stars were supposed to be brilliant out here, but thick clouds had rolled in, swallowing the moon and blotting out the sky. My phone battery was low, and I was kicking myself for forgetting a charger. No signal, either. Just that little, no service icon blinking cruelly on the screen mocking me. I told myself it was fine. I still had enough gas, and there was a gas station marked on the GPS a few miles up the road. But as I crested a small hill, a flickering neon sign appeared in the distance. Relief washed over me. I slowed down and turned onto a side road leading to the station, the gravel crunching under my tires. What I found was worse than I imagined. The gas pumps were rusted and cracked, the concrete stained with dark oil spills and dirt. The station building stood silent and abandoned, windows boarded up with weathered plywood, paint peeling like old skin. The only sign of life was a flickering, open, neon sign buzzing erratically above the door, casting sickly red and blue hues over the cracked pavement. I pulled up to the pumps and tried the station door. Locked. I checked every window and even walked around the building, searching for an emergency phone or a payphone. Nothing. Just silence. The kind of silence that presses down on your chest and makes your skin crawl. The wind picked up, carrying dust and dry leaves across the empty lot. The sky darkened further, and the air grew colder, prickling the hairs on my arms. I sat in the car, trying to calm my racing heart, but it wasn't working. That's when I saw him. At the edge of the lot, barely visible in the flickering neon glow, stood a man. He was tall and thin, his clothes soaked from the light rain that had started again, clinging to his frame. His face was hidden in shadow beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but the way he stood, perfectly still, sent a chill straight through me. His gaze felt like a knife slicing through the darkness, locking onto me with an intensity that made my breath catch. I locked the doors, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. For a moment, we just stared at each other through the glass. The man didn't move, didn't blink. It was as if he was waiting for me or watching. Slowly, he began walking toward the car. Each step was deliberate, slow, crunching gravel echoing in the silence. I turned the key in the ignition, but the engine sputtered and died. Panic twisted in my gut. I tried again, my fingers numb, but the car refused to start. The man was almost at the window now. I swallowed hard and forced myself to speak. "Can you help me?" My voice was barely a whisper. No answer. Only silence. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, rusty gas can. He lifted it slowly and shook it in front of me empty. His face caught the flickering light for just a second. It was gaunt and pale, the skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. His eyes were deep and hollow, black wells that seemed to swallow the faint light around them. Fear locked me in place. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the dark, melting into the shadows like smoke. Suddenly, the engine roared to life. I didn't hesitate. I slammed the accelerator and sped away from that cursed place, heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would burst. As the desert road stretched out in front of me, the neon sign faded behind me like a bad dream. But I caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror, the man standing at the edge of the road, watching his coat billowing in the desert wind. I've never forgotten those eyes, or the silent warning that night gave me. Since then, every time I hear the wind whistle through the trees, or feel the chill of a shadow in the corner of my vision, I remember that roadside encounter. Some roads aren't just paths to your destination. Some roads lead you into the unknown, into places you can never escape. And some strangers are not here to help. They're waiting, watching, and ready to trap you forever.